Welcome to the Sales Gravy Blue Studio. We are here with Alex Goldfayn. I'm Jeb Blount Jr. And we're talking about picking up the phone and selling, which is Alex Goldfayn's new book. And I read this week. It's fantastic. I think there's a lot in common with Sales Gravy and what Alex put out there. So I just want to kind of let you get started, introduce yourself to our audience, even though they know you pretty well. So just give us some background on yourself.
Well, thanks, Jeb. First of all, I would like to say that it's a joy and a pleasure to talk with you. And I think you might be better at this than your dad, given our early interactions. So we'll see what he thinks about that. It's great to talk with you, Jeb. Thank you. So the quick intro about me is I run a company called the Revenue Growth Consultancy. I grow the organizations of my clients. So everything in the books and everything we're going to talk about here is stuff that I do, not just to write about. And I do it not only for my clients, but I also do it for my own practice. My consultancy is a $3 million company that really is built on exactly the things that we talk about here. I build my business on 3 phone calls a day. So happy to jump into any of that with you.
Well, I think that puts us into common ground. One, I am the person at Sales Gravy who is out there making phone calls every day, talking to new clients, old clients, account managing, and overall trying to build the business from the revenue side. So there's some practical things in this book that really resonated with me. But I know that there is a space that you're really an expert in, which is manufacturing and distributing. And that's a place where you have focused your business. Can you tell us a little bit about where you grew up in sales? Is that a place where you started out? How did you become sort of the master of that realm?
Yeah, so it's manufacturing, distribution, and also B2B service organization as well, engineering companies, financial related companies. They sort of became my clients when I wrote a book, and it's that one, Evangelist Marketing, which was written for consumer electronics companies, because that was my clientele maybe a dozen years ago. That's where I worked. And as soon as I was a syndicated columnist for the Chicago Tribune. I was a radio show host on WGN in Chicago, and it was all technology shows. And so I was working with these consumer electronics companies, and I put out that book, Evangelist Marketing, which was how to market consumer electronics. At the time, it was Palm Pilot. I don't even know if you know what that is, Jeb. It was that Blackberries were the most popular phones, and that book came out, and all of a sudden, non-tech companies started calling me. And some manufacturers started calling me, some distributors started calling me. I started speaking in those worlds. And it went from there. What I learned was I liked it better working with family-owned operations. Multi-generational family businesses are almost all of my clients, many of my clients. I do have some ESOPs now, but they started out as family businesses. And so I love companies where grandpa started it and now dad runs it and dad's kids are in it. And it's been going for generations, and it's got, that family warmth and fuzziness in it. And also, I think with that comes a kindness with customers and prospects as well. And so it's my favorite kind of companies to work with. So I've kind of stayed there for a dozen years.
That's incredible. I want to go back to WGN. So what kind of shows were you hosting at the radio station?
I did a weekly show on consumer electronics. It was called the Technology Tailor Show. That was my brand back in those days. I was in my 20s. And it was just, we talked about the latest in technology. So during that show, Jeb, the first iPhone came out. During that show, televisions went from tubes to flat panels, right? That's how long ago it was, right? Like the one behind you. So plasma TVs came out, and then a few years later, LCD TVs came out. So it was like really in the golden era of consumer electronics development. And I got to kind of cover it as quasi media, and all these companies were marketing to me, and they were terrible at it. They were awful at it. It was, I don't know, it was tech specs and speeds, and it was a 386 SX at this many megahertz, and it was all boring and terrible. So I started helping them. And then my wife said, you could get paid for this. And she's always been smarter than me at these things. And I started working with those companies, and that's how I started helping companies sell more. from that radio show and from the newspaper column.
Interesting. Well, I don't want to date you or anything, but Palm Pilot and BlackBerry are like scrolls from ancient text for me. I was never utilizing Blackberries, but that's really interesting that you were there at the beginning and you started seeing how organizations were really missing it when it came to messaging. And then
I'm just glad you recognize the reference, Jeb.
I do recognize it. It's the thing is, I know what they are. I just don't know how to use them. But I guess it doesn't really matter.
You
anymore.
shouldn't ever need to, so it's good. It works.
So you moved from that space into consulting with these organizations on, your evangelist marketing, so consumer technology, and then you wrote a book called 5 Minute Selling, which is a bestseller and one of my favorite books. And we have a course on Sales Gravy University that is 5 Minute Selling, and people love it. So you moved from the consumer technologies to the space that you were talking about, all these different industries. And you brought this method to them, which is how to pick up the phone and utilize different channels like text messaging, email. Now we have video messaging, smoke signals, whatever it might be, 5 minutes a day to build new business. Yeah. So what was the eye-opening situation or eye-opening situations that led you to write 5 Minute Selling with the organizations you were working with?
So most salespeople we tend to be reactive because our phone rings all day, right? It's not that we're sitting around doing nothing. We're busy. And all day long, customers are calling us. And they rarely call when they're happy, right? You know this. You're calling all the time and you sell, Jeb. So customers will never call in and say, hey, man, great job. I wanted to thank you for what you're doing. Can I pay you some more because you're doing so well? We don't get those kinds of calls. What we get is you screwed it up, or where is it, or why is it so late? And so we tend to sell reactively. And I think 90 to 95% of salespeople sell that way. The problem with that is if the right inquiries come in, you might grow that year. But if the wrong inquiries come in, you won't grow. And it's not up to you at all. You're just a pinball bouncing around from one incoming thing to the next. Now, what I realized was if we just infuse a little bit of proactivity into that, otherwise totally reactive day, that's enough. We don't need hours of proactivity. We don't even need a half an hour of proactivity. We just need 5 minutes. That's it. What can you do in 5 minutes? I was just doing a webinar, and an attendee on that webinar, who's the head of sales at his consulting company, said that between 9 a.m. and 9:10 in those 10 minutes, he makes 7 to 10 phone calls a day. Every single day, he makes 7 to 10 calls. And you said you make calls all day, so you know how long this takes, Jeff, right? So in 5 minutes, you can call a lot of people.
Absolutely. I mean, something that we teach at Sales Gravy, something I do personally with prospecting and following the 5 minute selling method, is that you can do about anything in 5 minutes. Any human being can set their mind onto a task for 5 minutes at a time. In fact, you can probably do it for 15 minutes at a time, and triple the amount of effort you do. And the thing is, he says, that particular person says, I can do 7 calls in 10 minutes. And somebody's like, man, if I really looked at it, I'd probably do 7 calls in an hour. Well, why is that? It's because you're taking time to research every single person you're calling. You're logging everything at that moment. You're taking a coffee break. You get rejected at that second call. Someone tells you no, go pound sand, and you lose your motivation. So you just go walk around the office with your head down. But what I found and what you found is, okay, listen, if we take 5 minutes, I can do 5 calls in 5 minutes. And a lot of that is I'm just going to leave a voicemail, right? Like I'm just going to not get anybody on the phone. Now, I like to call at about 8:30 in the morning because that's when executives are in the office and they're getting stuff done and nobody's picking up the phone and calling them at that time because they don't want to interrupt their day or be a nuisance. But nobody's picking up the phone and calling those people because they feel nervous about it. But if I pick up the phone and call 5 people and leave 5 voicemails, in 5 minutes, I've reached out to 5 more people than I would have if I didn't do it at all. I think that's...
And go ahead. You couldn't be more right. You said 2 really interesting things, and I'm going to try to cover them both. 5 voicemails in 5 minutes is totally doable. And then so in the book, There is a piece on when you leave a voicemail, also send a text, because it's a really powerful sort of 1-2 punch. So that when you send a text, you leave your voice message, and I'll give you an example of the kind of message that's scripted out in the book. Jeb, it's Alex. Hope you're doing great. Listen, man, I thought of you because I have a client similar to you, and they're doing some awesome things with us, growing a lot. And I think some of those things would work really well for you too. So here's my number. If you have a couple minutes, would love to connect. And of course, I want to catch up too. That took less than 20 seconds. I was watching the clock. That's my voicemail. Then I put down the phone and I text. Now I start to text. And the text says, Jeb, per my voicemail, how does your Tuesday or Thursday afternoon look? Would love to catch up. And that's it. And now the choice goes for you. It becomes not, should I call Alex back or no, but should I call Alex back or should I text him back? Now I've given you a choice of how to get back to me. And what we found statistically, Jeb, this is cool, over hundreds of thousands of calls logged over the years, because my client salespeople, we take a quick note of every proactive effort so that we can track things. Out of hundreds of thousands logged, over 500,000, easily over 500,000 calls, 2/3 will get back to you if you leave a voicemail and a text message that way. 2/3 will communicate back to you, and 2/3 of those do it by text.
That's fantastic.
They do it by text because it's easier.
That's fantastic. It's something I just recently wrote about, is that text messaging is one of those really underrated sales tools. There's a couple of different reasons I find that salespeople don't utilize text messaging. It's one, they don't have any familiarity with somebody, so they're really conscious of how that plays. I mean, if you think about text messages, from people that you don't know, your first reaction is, who are you and why are you texting me? And then if it's a text message from a business, it's usually something really terribly scripted, like you said from those days at WGA. They're really terribly scripted, and they're probably from a robot. But that's something that I haven't heard of before, is sending a text message with the voicemail. So dive a little bit deeper into why that text message is so powerful in terms of creating a connection and then getting a response back from people.
So I think mostly because you're calling people who you know. It's interesting. People have such a gigantic fear around picking up the phone. And this was the second thing that I wanted to touch on, so we're doing it now. So you asked a great question. When you said nobody's calling those executives because they're nervous about it, right? That's because of fear. They're afraid they're going to upset the customer. They're afraid they're going to annoy the customer. They're going to get yelled at. They're mostly afraid of being rejected into their ear holes, right? It's an intimate rejection. If I call you on the phone and you tell me no, you're doing that to my head. Versus if I email you and you reject me. Let's say you get the email, you see the email, you reply to the email. Those are long odds, right, of all of that happening. Usually the response to an email is silence, right? Because when you email, you volunteer yourself into the crap, with the junk, into the spam filters. But let's say you reply to me and say, Alex, I'm good, I don't need that, and you reject me. There's a physical distance there. The monitor is away from my head. There's a distance from my eyes. Plus it's text, plus I don't get the intimacy of your tone of voice into my ear. And so all of that is safer. That is why we go to email, which is the least effective selling tool, but generates the least amount of fear as well, instead of proactive calling, which is the most effective selling tool, but it's used the least. Isn't that nuts? The single most effective tool we have, proactive calling, is used the least because we're so damn afraid of it. And fear is the strongest emotion, and that's what makes us avoid the phone.
It's really incredible how many salespeople will come to us and say, hey, I emailed the prospect 7 times. I sent them, a white paper. I sent them a LinkedIn message. I sent them 3 LinkedIn messages, and nobody ever got back to me. Why can't I, how can I go reach out to them that will get engagement? How can I reach out to them and get engagement? It's like, dude, pick up the phone. Like, those people want to talk to a human being. Nothing makes you more transactional than treating your customer as transactional. Now, one of the things that I found it is really interesting about salespeople is that they look at a phone call or a phone the first thing in the morning, like it's got 1,000 legs and eyes and it weighs 100 pounds and it's going to eat your hand off. And it's because of that fear of rejection. It's because, like you said, they're telling you no to your head. But
Yeah.
I found that, and this is different for different industries. I found that when I pick up the phone and I talk to an executive leader and they pick up the phone because I called them and I say something that's strong, like we have a method here that I like to use, hey, Alex, it's Jeb Blount Jr. at Sales Gravy. The reason I'm calling is just to get some time on your calendar because I work with organizations like yours to build their pipeline more effectively so they can close more revenue. Let's meet next Tuesday at 2. And that's just our method of calling those folks. Mm-hmm. When I call them with a reason and I speak with confidence, almost all of them will respect me. And if they don't, I don't really want to work with them, but almost all of them will respect me enough to say, no, Jeb, I'm not good with this. They don't give me some horrible rejection. They don't give me some terrible, like, you need to go walk off a cliff or anything like that. People will have a conversation with you, but there's horrible stories out there and you talk to the wrong people and you say the wrong thing or you don't know what you're going to, what value you actually bring to that client. You end up in a trap where you're getting rejected, not because they don't want to work with you, but because you didn't bring value to them. And then you feel like it's their fault that they didn't want to work with you. So that's something that I find a lot with sales folks. I want to move to a question that I have, particularly for you. I was listening to another podcast that you were on, and you have a really interesting way of going about talking to folks that you already know, whether that's somebody who's bought from you or somebody in your network. And it's the call that you say, hey, how are you doing? So you told a really interesting story about one of your people who did that, and she responded kind of like biting off his head because she gets calls from salespeople all the time. Dive a little deeper into what that does for a salesperson in their sales day if they're calling people that they know or have worked with and just asking them how they're doing.
Sure. Sorry, you're hearing my office mate there. I don't know if you could hear that or not. So most people, as soon as they hear make a call, assume that it's a cold call. That's how afraid we are. And that's how all of this negativity we have about cold calling, that boils down to, I hate getting cold calls. I'm not going to do it. Well, I'm not saying you should cold call. I'm saying you should call people who you know. And I acknowledge that some people have to cold call, right? Some people, that's the job, right? It sounds like you might have to do some cold calling, right? So I get it. Some jobs, you got to cold call. But also, all of us know hundreds of people. We all know who would recognize us or at a minimum, recognize the company name. So when you call executives and you say Sales Gravy and they recognize that, Jeb, that's enough. You've got a anchor point there that you can then build your conversation around. So the story you're referring to, I think, from this other podcast is a salesperson client of mine stood up in a workshop and told his story of calling one of his customers. And we had talked about it previously, and he said, I'm just not connecting with this customer, and we're just not hitting it off, and we seem to be sort of butting heads. He goes, "What should I do?" And I said, "Call her." And I said, "Well, what should I say?" As I say, "Hello, talk to her like a human." And so he did that, to his credit. And then we were at a workshop, and he stood up and he told the story. And he said, "Alex, I called her," and I said, "What happened?" He said, "She picked up the phone, and he said, hi, Jennifer, it's Mike." And she said immediately, "What's wrong?" And he said, "Nothing's wrong. I'm just calling to see how you're doing. And I wanted to connect." And she said, "What do you need?" Because that's the only time people call her, right? They call her when something's wrong or they need something. The only time people hear from a salesperson is when something's wrong or they need something. That's why she said those things. "What's wrong? What do you need?" And then for the third time, he said, "Nothing's wrong. I'm just calling to see how you're doing and where I can help." And then there was this long pause, he said. It was about 30 seconds went by of silence. And he thought maybe they had lost the connection. And then he heard her say this word, "Really? Nobody calls me like that. Nobody ever calls me like that." And he said they talked for 20 minutes. They had a great connection. And then she gave him 20 additional line items over the next month or so. I said, did you get any business on that call? He said, no. I said, when did it come? Because I assumed when you break through that, I sort of just knew that the business would come. I said, when did it come? And he said, within about the next month, I got 20 new line items. So that's the power of proactively calling. The definition of proactive for our purposes, right? So the book is called Pick Up the Phone and Sell. And the subtitle there is how proactive calls to customers and prospects can double your sales. For our purposes, the definition of a proactive call is when nothing is wrong, when there is no problem, because that's the only time we call is when there is a problem. When we show up without a problem, magic happens. You're the only one showing up that way. Look at everybody's sitting by the phone, but nobody's calling them. When you call, we assume their phones are ringing off the hook. That's not the case. Nobody's calling. So when you call, you are the only one. It makes you stand out, and it's not a difficult crowd to stand out from.
I 100% agree with you. I kind of want to pivot to an area that you talk about a lot in your books, and we referenced a little bit earlier, is that the mindset around calling and proactive calling is they approach it like a cold call. And something you write in your book is, there really is no such thing as a cold call. You talk about, being able to connect with somebody on a human level, but how can people start shaping their mindset around these proactive calls to approach it from a different perspective than, I got to reach out to need something, or I've got to reach out to sell them something. I've got to reach out to do whatever except for listening. So how do people change that mindset that they have about their proactive efforts?
Yeah, think about your calls not as selling calls or as cold calls or as pitching calls. Think of them as relationship calls. Think about yourself being at a bar with a buddy, if that's something that you do. And if you don't go to the bar, maybe you're just hanging out in the backyard or over dinner. You're just talking to a friend. So what do you talk to a friend about? You ask about their family, you ask about their lives, you ask how the trip went that they were just on. You see about the kids. You talk about sports. You don't have to talk about all of those things, but it just, when you imagine you're talking to a friend, it becomes a comfortable conversation. You kind of put your feet up. It's the advantage, by the way, of a phone versus a Zoom conversation, right? Like we're having now. It's that you can be comfortable. If I'm on the phone, I could be walking around my office, right? I pace back and forth. I hold a baseball bat, right? There's the bat behind me there. So think about it like you're talking to a friend and you're just looking for places where you can help. So I help my clients grow their sales. My typical client adds 15 to 30% now annually in new business. That's all I do is I work with salespeople about selling more, but I almost never say the word sell in my day. What I say 100 times in my day is the word help. I'd like to help you with that. Where can I help? I want to help you with that again. It's been a little while. I'd like to start helping you again. And what you find when you use the word help, one, it's impossible to get mad at you. Nobody's going to say to you, how dare you try to help me and make my life easier, ever. The other thing you find is you're the only one doing it that way. Nobody else is doing it. And people will say, oh my God, right? Jeb Jr. wants to help me. I don't have anybody like that. And they will literally look for ways to reward you for your effort so that they can pay you for it. They'll almost feel like they owe you if you show up to try to help them. Have you experienced that, Jeb?
100%. And I've also experienced the other side where I didn't have those conversations, where I didn't practice those things. And it's a world of difference in the conversations and just the relationship that you build with other folks. I was thinking about, as you were speaking, I was thinking about Anthony Iannarino, giant in the field, and I can call him my friend. He said so on LinkedIn. Go check it out. But he talks about a level 3 versus a level 4 conversation. And if you don't know what that is, go check out his stuff. It's really important. But it gets to the point of what you're saying is that when you are proactively reaching out to somebody, when you're proactively going out there and saying, hey, I want to help you. Right? I'm here to help you. You are positioning yourself to be an expert, to be a consultant, and you're out there to you're not reacting like we talked about. You're not being reactive where they come to you and say, hey, I have a challenge. Can you help me with it? You're already going to them and saying, hey, you might have this challenge in the future. Let me help you solve it before it even happens. And the value that you bring as that sort of salesperson is worlds beyond every other salesperson that you are competing against.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, like you said, they're going to say things like, I really appreciate what you did for me. And they're going to feel like they should pay you at what you're worth, rather than that level 3 conversation where you're reacting to them saying, hey, I've got this problem. Can you help me? And you're picking up the phone saying, yeah, I can do that. And then they're haggling with you over what you're worth because you didn't bring the value to begin with. And like you said, 90 to 95% of salespeople aren't doing that. And I'm at fault for that. Those conversations are totally different. As a young salesperson, one of the issues that I have is being confident enough to call someone like Alex back and say, hey, I won the business with you before. I want to help you keep solving that problem, or what else is on your wish list that I can help you solve. Where as experienced folks like you would know that you have to do that all the time, every single day.
You're exactly right, Jeb. And when you show up proactively like that, you touched on this just now. When you show up and say, where can I help? What you're doing something incredibly valuable for that person. You're saving them from having to think about it again in the future. They don't have to think about it in 2 weeks or in a month when it becomes a crisis, when it becomes urgent. You're offering to help them with it now. And that's incredibly valuable. You're saving them the time and the worry in the future. And people don't have people like that in their lives, so if you're just that way for somebody, they're going to grab onto you and they'll never let go.
I can't tell you enough how different that relationship is. And you said they'll grab and hold on to you. I have folks that I did a really good job of going out and proactively working with them and becoming that consultant, and they still work. It's been 18 months, and I've been in sales for 18 months, so I know it's not a long time for some folks, but it's a long time for me. Is that those folks have been working with me since day one. In the same breath, I will tell you that I have not done that with some folks, and I paid the price for it because they didn't hold on to me, and I didn't go out and reach out to them, and I am still trying to get back in the circle and be connected with them, and I'm leaving my services on the table. It's my obligation as a salesperson, what I do, to help their business, and because I wasn't that consultative person for them, I wasn't that person in their lives that they call and say, hey, Jeb, what do you think about this, right? And I don't call them and say, hey, I saw this on the news, how can I help you? I'm not back in. It's a lot harder to continue those relationships, and you're costing yourself, millions of dollars potentially over your sales career.
Real money, and you're costing it for your company and also for your family.
Exactly.
Yeah, and it's all because of this huge amount of fear that we feel. Fear is the strongest emotion, and it rules over everything. So the reason most companies can't get their people to make proactive calls like this is they don't address the fear. You've got to address. You can't just say, we're going to make 10 calls a day now. Well, but I'm afraid of that. They're going to reject me into my ear. That's stronger than you have to make 10 calls a day. So we have to deal with the fear. We have to address it. We have to recognize it. We have to tell people how to overcome it, what to do about it. The book covers that. And I think that emotional piece of it is really, really important.
There's a line in your book, and it's very early on. It's on your title as well. You can double your sales, but you write, what would 25-50% more sales mean to you if you were able to increase your activity? What would that mean to you? And I love that question. I want you to dive a little bit into that because it connects how this practice and what you talk about in this book has real results for you as a salesperson.
Yeah, well, a lot of people deserve for you to make these uncomfortable calls, and the people that deserve for you to do this work are your family, who actually we spend less time with than we do with our jobs. We spend more time at work. Also, your customers deserve these calls because they would like to benefit from your value more, and because you're better than the competition. And when we don't make these calls, we're hurting our customers, because we're having them go to the competition now for these other things that we can do for them. I think your prospects deserve for you to make these calls, because right now they're suffering through the competition, again, which is not as good as you. They don't do what they say they're going to do like you do. They aren't available like you are on the evenings and on the weekends. They aren't fast to deliver like you are. So And the number one person who deserves for you to make these calls is you. Circling back around to your question, you work really, really hard. You take risks. Nobody gets rejected more than we salespeople do, right? We're in a business of rejection. Our life is to be rejected. In baseball, Jeb, right? You fail 70% of the time, you go to the Hall of Fame. You're one of the best. In sales, it's less than that. The success rate is less than that. The rejection is more than that. So if we succeed 10 to 15% of the time, 20% of the time, you're one of the best, the very best. That means 80 to 90%, if you're one of the best, 80 to 90% are telling you no all day long. And so we need to walk through those rejections to get to the yes. The rejections are prerequisite to the yes. If you're not getting them, you're not going to get the yeses. So when you make these calls, you increase your odds. You increase your batting average. Yes, you'll get rejections, but you'll also get a lot of yeses. And that's the work. You deserve that.
I agree 100%. As a salesperson in whatever business you're in, how, as a salesperson, I would choose, first of all, how I would choose the business I'm working in. I'm saying this for young people who are trying to get in their careers. Work for a company, when you're evaluating them, work for a company that fits your values. Work for a company that, if at all you can, provides a service that you can get behind, that you can believe in, that does good work for their clients. Once you do that, if you're in an organization that you believe in, then you must understand it is your obligation every day to wake up and go talk to people, because what you do drives their business growth and drives their revenue and drives their success, and that should be your obligation. But at the same time, I like the way you flip that. You deserve to play on those fields. And like you said, in baseball, you just fail 70% of the time, you're in the Hall of Fame. In sales, if you're if you close 20% of your business, you're like the number one salesperson in your organization. You have to be, as a salesperson, you have to be willing to have doors closed in your face to open up new ones. And that's just the way it is. If you never go knock on doors, you'll never open one. And then you'll fail. And that's what we preach here at Sales Gravy. But there's a piece of your book that I want to get to, which is time blocking. So talking about how you do this, the 5-minute selling method, but also combining this with picking up the phone and selling. Yeah. How do people do this on Fridays? Do they do it on Tuesdays? When do you think you should be doing these proactive calls?
So in terms of time in the day, they should be first thing in the morning, which we've already touched on. I think that the time to do uncomfortable work is when you have your maximum possible energy and focus to overcome your discomfort with it and your fear with it to make the calls. So I think first thing in the morning, you said 8:30, 8, 9, that's the window. That's the ballpark. What day you should do them on, I think you should do them consistently. You should do them daily. You should make it a part of your daily habit. I think I told you, I run my business on 3 calls a day. 3 calls a day is about 800 in a year. So 5 calls a day is 1,300 in a year. And in the book, that's all really, I say make between 3 and 5. That's all you need a day. That will often take 5 minutes, as we've already discussed, right? We said 2/3 will communicate back. So when I make my 3 calls a day, 780 is the exact number in a year. 2/3 of that is about 530. I don't need any more conversation and communications than 530 times in a year. I work solo by myself, right? Running a sizable consulting practice. That's all I need. When it slows down, I up it to 5 a day. First thing in the morning, I get them done, and then it's like you've exercised that day. I feel good. I go on to my other work, which sometimes is reactive. It's speeches and webinars and training and everything else I do. But I know I've done my business development work. I know I'm feeding my family. And that's the point of the work.
Absolutely. I was waiting for the Mark Twain quote, right? So if you have to eat a frog, and if you can't see it behind me, but I've got a sign over here, eat the frog. Mark Twain says, if you got to eat a frog in the morning, or if you got to eat a frog, eat it early in the morning because it's not going to be better later in the afternoon. And you have to eat 2 frogs, eat the biggest one first, right?
That's right.
Every
That's
single
right.
day, and that was sort of a leading question because my answer would be every day, every day, every day. You have to be the salesperson who goes out there and makes calls. And like you said, the best time to do that is when you are up and awake, you've had your cup of coffee, you have your most energy, because when you are in that position, your brain is better at handling rejection than if you wait to the end of the day at 4 or 5 p.m. I mean, I've tried to make prospecting calls at the end of the day. Somebody rejects me and I give up, right? Like, it's just because your brain is just not equipped to handle that after you've done all of a day's work, right? Do it early in the morning, and it's like going to the gym. It will always kind of suck, but once you do it early in the morning, it's like, I've got it done. I ate the frog. I can move on. All right.
You're not going to get any less busy at 2:00.
You're not going to get any less busy at 2:00. Last night I was out, working until 8:30 because that's what life is like in sales. You just have to embrace that grind. And I was, working with clients until 8:30. But the deal is, if I try and make prospecting calls at 8:30 at night versus 8:30 in the morning, I'm going to be way less successful. Well, Alex, totally. I appreciate your time, and I love this book. I'm a big proponent of it. I read it this week. Again, it's a fantastic book for any salesperson, but if you're young like me, figure out how to do this stuff early, because if you don't, you're going to end up making mistakes that will bite you for years to come. Any last thoughts that you want to drive home in terms of what your book is about and what the audience should glean from it?
Sure. I have thoughts, but I also have a question for you that I want to make sure we ask. I would love to ask you this question before we stop our conversation, if that's okay with you.
It's good with me.
Because I'd love to hear your take on this. My final thoughts on the book are the phone, as we started our conversation with, is the single most effective tool that we have. And it's the most underutilized tool also. It's the most effective and the least used. So if we can show up for our customers and ask them how we can help them and tell them that we're thinking about them, we're going to be the only ones. And when you stand out, you will get the business. If you won't get it on that call, meaning if there's no itch when you show up to scratch, you will get it later when the itch comes, because they're going to think to themselves, well, geez, I need this thing, right? That Jeb can help me with. I didn't need it then, but he's the only one that called me. He's the only one that showed up. He's the only one who gave a damn. And then they're going to say, who should I call? The one who cares or the one who I haven't heard from in 3 years? They're going to call the one who showed up. They're going to call you. It will feed the machine. Proactive calls feed the machine. So lead with your calls. Make it the tip of your spear, the tip of your selling spear. Don't make the call the last thing, meaning don't lead up to the call, right? With emails and texts and LinkedIn messages and all that stuff. Make the call the first thing. Make it first in your process and make it first in your day. And you will find your business shooting through the roof. Those are my last words on the book. Can I ask you my question now?
You can ask me your question now.
Whenever I talk about this in workshops, which is frequently, and now thankfully, thank goodness they're in person again. Somebody in every session will raise their hand. Some owner, right, will raise their hand. And they'll say, what about young people? Young people won't use the phone. Young people don't want to use the phone. My guys, my young folks, they won't do it. And I know what my answer to that is, but I was curious about what you have to say about that as a young salesperson.
Well, I get this question a lot. People ask me, hey, I've got a bunch of young salespeople. Are you using the phone? How do we get them to use the phone? Or how do we get them to do their particular job? Because it doesn't seem like they're very interested in that thing, especially when it comes to outbound prospecting. And I'll look at any owner, any CEO, anybody in sales right in the face and say it's not a generational thing. Every salesperson was young, and every salesperson doesn't want to pick up the phone. It has nothing to do with whether or not they're 23 or they're 53. Like, people just are fearful of that rejection. I'll also say this: there's some sort of bias that we've been telling ourselves over the last 20 years, and it's that young people are addicted to their phones, or they only want to do passive asynchronous communication via text or LinkedIn or whatever it might be, social media. I've found that there's been a resurgence in some sort of I guess revolt against that idea. And in young salespeople, we recognize that we are very good at those other channels. We're very good at the LinkedIn. We're very good at the social media. We're very good at the text messaging because we grew up with it and we have comfort there. But we recognize that it's not the same as the conversations we have when we get somebody on the phone. And if you are a young salesperson, you have to understand that yourself. You can be comfortable with sending a text message. Take Alex's advice, make the phone call, leave the voicemail, shoot a text message. And, because you're comfortable with those other channels, you can use those to your strength, but rely on the phone. It is the most effective way to speak with folks. I've never found any conversation I've had asynchronously that led to a deeper relationship more so than the phone, which is a synchronous communication channel. And at any time, if I'm a coach, if I'm a CEO of an organization or coaching someone in those organizations, saying, "Hey, how do I get my young salespeople to get on the phone?" Well, utilize what they're good at. Take those asynchronous channels, those text messages, those emails, and say, "Hey, if you get a response back," right? Because that's what they're looking for. They're looking for no rejection. They're looking for less friction. So if you get a response back, utilize that and move it to a phone call. Get them there first. Get them to recognize that the phone call is a way to go. And then once they start picking up the phone and calling those folks after they've responded, they'll start to utilize the phone first because it cuts out so much time. Right? You could save yourself hours of time if you just go to the phone first rather than try and pick up an email or shoot them a LinkedIn message or a text or whatever it might be.
You want to know what my answer to that guy is? I thought your answer is great. Because you're right. It's not a generational thing. But so my answer is, guess who's the most effective at implementing proactive calls at organizations across all of my clients, across all these years? It's young people. Young people are the most successful. The ones you assume don't want to do it or won't do it, when you give them a system and a process, it's not that they don't want to use the phone. It's that nobody's ever really shown them how. You didn't grow up with it. When your dad and I were growing up and we wanted to talk to our friends, that's all we had. All we had was the phone. We'd call them. Want to talk to grandma, grandpa? We'd call them on the phone. That's all there was. When we give salespeople a process and some language and a method, young people are the ones who have the growing lives, the growing families, right? They want a bigger house. You want to travel. You want to do things. You need more money. You need to sell more. That's who runs with it. That's who does the best. The most successful with these proactive calls are young people. It's just that you discount them from step number one, right? Before we ever start, you did, but they don't want to. Not that they don't want to. They just don't really know how. And you're discounting them. Show them how, and they run with it.
I 100% agree. I was actually coached on this by Jeb Sr. Yesterday because I made a couple of mistakes as a young salesperson, and he was just giving me some feedback. And he said, there's a problem that you have, but it's not a problem. It's just a young salesperson problem. It's that you are so eager to help people that you end up saying yes to too much, and you're the person out there who's trying to solve every problem. Now that's something you learn over time, and it's something I deal with. But you're right. Young salespeople are the best at implementing these things with the process because we are so eager to do a good job, and we have to sell more. There's so many pressures on us to do well that we actually are the main movers in a business early on. So I 100% agree with you, and I'm glad that there's somebody on our side. I'm glad that there's somebody out there who's advocating for us.
Totally. Yeah, because it just becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. They assume that you won't and that you don't want to. You want to, you just don't really exactly know how, because that person doesn't even show you how, because he just assumes you don't want to. And then it all becomes self-fulfilling. And now young people don't want to make calls. Young people do want to make calls.
Absolutely.
And the book is how.
So, tell us where we can pick up the phone and sell, how proactive calls to customers and prospects can double your sales. Where can we find it, and where should people go to find more information about you?
Yeah, so you can buy the book wherever books are sold. It's published by Wiley, just like your dad's books are. And so you can go to Amazon. You can go to Barnes and Noble, you can go to Books a Million, you can go wherever you go. It launches. Well, as we sit and talk to each other now, it launches next week, which is the 22nd of September. But that whole week, you should be able to order it and buy it. As far as learning more about my work and the consulting work that I do for clients, it's at my website, which is goldfayn.com. My last name, goldfayn.com. There it is on the book, GOLDFAYN. And the consulting work is there, the speaking work is there, the training work is there, and that's where to go.
Awesome. Well, everyone, go pick up the phone and sell. And it is Jeb Blount Jr. signing off from the Sales Gravy headquarters in the Sales Gravy Blue Studio. Thank you so much to Alex Goldfayn for being here with me today. We will see you all soon.